Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Off the Podium. I have a really interesting duo with me. It's the Newman Oltman Guitar Duo. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great pleasure to be here with you.
When we corresponded via email, you said that you're been on Zoom a lot. So I want to know what you've been up to the past couple of months and teaching, performing, and doing all that. What's been happening the past few months for you?
You got a few months to hear about it? Go ahead, Laura.
Well, everything that artists are doing, they're trying to do it on Zoom or YouTube, or everybody's trying to do stuff online because they can't do it live. And of course, the universities have all the teaching, had suddenly set everyone up to teach online. So at the end of the semester, we were teaching, of course, on Zoom, but then since we learned how to use it and then saw what people were doing, we produced a concert series online in May. So we were pretty early on with that, streaming a concert series. So it was a pretty steep learning curve. But, it worked out. And the artists couldn't rehearse, they couldn't play together, so they all made little movies. Except for us, we could do it. But we did do one thing. We collaborated with a guy in Milwaukee and played a trio with a guy in Milwaukee in the concert. But it was very complicated how we did it. But we managed to do that. But everything else, everybody had to make little, movies with talking and playing. But now they have them. And it was something to watch.
It's just such a different experience creating music when you're in a live setting with people right in front of you and they react to you as compared to, and now I'm done with my piece. I hope a couple of people are still listening and applauding. And maybe you'll see little clapping hands. But, it is what it is. And artists are nothing if they're not resilient and flexible. So we've learned how to do that. But I think the biggest challenge has been with the teaching. And the students have had, oh man, I feel so much sympathy for what the students have had to do this past semester. Going from their happy place of being at school and going to class and having their lessons, and more than anything, being in ensembles, collaborating with their peers, with their colleagues. It's just to go from that to still doing all of those things, but in a completely different way. That's what's been the biggest challenge.
Well, I think actually bigger than that was doing chamber music.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people in colleges and universities play in ensembles almost, I would say exclusively. If you play an orchestral instrument, you're playing in an ensemble pretty much no matter what. And those are not possible with the current sort of online situation. You can't play in real time together with someone else. So what students have figured out, and everybody and teachers and figured out how to make these recordings where you overlap tracks. And it's very complicated how to do it with classical music where the tempo doesn't stay the same. You can't necessarily just play to a click track. People came up with all kind of creative solutions, and then sometimes they would put video in it, and it was hard, and they figured out how to do it. So in that sense, it was, I think, a learning experience people wouldn't have had. Or us, we wouldn't have had it either. I finally learned how to run the iMovie program on my cell phone. But it's something that they might use because now they have more power to produce their own audio and video products that they can put online. So I think they might be more encouraged, they might feel more confident, and for some it might turn out to be a career.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, let's get to the big news, which is the new recording. I want to hear about the new recording, how it all came about. And you worked with a living composer, right? So I want to hear all about it. So why don't both of you say a little bit about the recording?
Sure. Well, we've spent our whole careers trying to work with living composers. It's so much a part of our mission artistically as the ensemble, because the music of today is what should resonate with audiences and with performers, and it's also what we're leaving as our legacy for the future. So even if there are pieces that are not especially well received now, who knows, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 500 years from now, what that reaction is going to be. So we've worked with a lot of composers and recorded and performed duos, ensemble pieces, concertos, and so this was our most recent project.
This composer that we commissioned is probably, I'm gonna go right out there and say he's the most famous Latin American composer living, Leo Brouwer. And he's written for a lot of different ensembles, all kinds of music, but he's probably most famous for writing for a guitar. He's left a huge repertoire of guitar music, but not too much in the way of guitar duets. So Michael had been thinking for like the last 40 years that he should write a guitar duet, but it's hard, to commission him because he's Cuban.
Yeah.
And there was a really relatively brief moment of opportunity where United States citizens could work with Cubans and Cuban artists to get commissioned works of art. Now it's gotten much more difficult. So we kind of struck while the iron was hot, and it all worked out. And it was not easy to get it to work out. It took a number of years of just negotiating with him and his office in Cuba, and then figuring out what could we do and how could we pass money around, and could he come here? Could he get a visa to come here? Which he did. He did manage to do that. So it was very, very difficult to pull it off. But he wrote a really good piece. It's 4-movement suite, and it's based on a Latin American book called the Book of Imaginary Beings by Jorge Luis Borges, which is a compendium of mythological creatures.
And this book that Borges wrote, it has things like the unicorn. It has, that are familiar to everybody. It has the minotaur, and Brouwer used some of these mythological creatures, but he also used some of the more obscure ones. One that we were not familiar with called the manticora, or the manticore. And that one is, what is it? It's a body of a lion and the head of a man with 3 rows of teeth interspersed, sharp teeth like a comb. And then the tail has a spike at the end.
As scorpion arrows, spines that shoot out from it. Yeah. And kill you, and it likes to eat human flesh. Everything likes to eat human flesh. They all like to eat human flesh.
And this is from Persia originally. So very, very interesting creatures. And Brouwer had been rereading this Borges book. It was Borges' 100th his centenary. And Brouwer got inspired, and it was right around the time that he accepted this commission. Wow. So there it was.
And you've done this many, many times, and it's so great to be part of history, right? When you're commissioning a piece, and like you said, sometimes a piece is not well received now, but maybe 20 years from now, someone else picks it up, plays it a bit more, and the audiences come around to it. They're like, wow, that's actually a great piece. And one thing that's great with duos and smaller ensembles, I think, they're maybe able to do it a little bit more than major symphony orchestras, where they are able to perform a piece a couple of times, which is absolutely essential for both the artist to grow with the piece, but also for the piece to be heard a few times, and someone who might have heard it the first time didn't really like it. The second time around, they're like, wow, that piece is actually really interesting. I like this part of it or that part. But specific to compositions, how much did you have input with the composer? Like, did you ask the composer, can you do this on the guitar? I really want this. Or and if not with this composer, then maybe
Zero.
Zero. Absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
No. Well, let me say, Leo Brouwer is a great guitarist. Like, you don't have to worry, give him any advice on how to write for guitar. He is one of the best composers there is for guitar. Like, what he gets out of it is amazing. You know, like the old saw about guitar is, oh, it's like a miniature orchestra because it'll make all these sounds. But like, just making sounds doesn't really get you that far. You have to be like somehow integral to the music. But Brouwer is really good at, I would say, making the sounds that the guitar makes like expressive. And he's really remarkable in his use of the guitar as an instrument.
I think at one point I might have written something in an email to his agent in Cuba saying, well, you know, would you like any suggestions of, you know, thematic material of things that we might like Maestro Leo to? And she wrote, no, that's okay. We'll get back to you when it's done.
Well, also we received funding for the commission from a guy who's a big fan of Leo Brouwer, his recording executive, his father had worked with Brouwer when Brouwer was young. And he likes some of these very tonal pieces. Brouwer has written a lot of different kinds of stuff. He's like Picasso in that way. Like you can't say what is Leo Brouwer. You could play a bunch of things by him and they wouldn't be alike at all. But partly it's because he had a pretty big part of his career as writing film scores. And you know, if you're an artist in Cuba, you work for the government. That's just the way I mean, everybody in Cuba basically works for the government. Yeah. But like particularly artists, so the government would say, look, here's what you're going to write. There's this film and we want you to write this music for it. So he wrote a lot of music from film scores that ended up being arranged as like little guitar pieces, and some of it is very tuneful and very pleasant. But he doesn't always say he likes that music. Like, he'll tell you that he likes less tuneful, more, I'm not going to say utterly atonal because his style isn't necessarily that, but he likes the little dissonance. That's what he prefers. So, of course, Jeff was saying, the guy who had commissioned the piece, well, maybe tell him, you know, to write something like, you know, like this piece that was so pretty. I love that really pretty music. And he didn't do that. But I think what he wrote is better.
Well, I would say with Brouwer's music, as with many composers, even if it's not always in a key the way that we would think of E major or C sharp minor, it's really melodic. And there's a lot of sense of modality, various kinds of modes, and there's in this particular piece, there's a lot of hummable material, even in the midst of a lot of great intensity around it.
But I think it's for a guitar piece, it's really vivid and it has a big dynamic range, and it's just the kind of material you just don't think, oh, guitar music. It doesn't sound, for one thing, it doesn't sound like it's Latin American music at all. It's not based on anything relating to Latin America. It's just, I don't know. It's really unique. What can I say? It's unique.
I wanted to know other collaborations that you've done and how much you've had with composers as far as, you know, in the process of them composing, how much input did you have? And just some stories, maybe some collaborations that you could talk about.
Well, I actually was going to say that, when you asked the question about Brouwer, because it's varied so greatly. We enjoy working with composers who've never written for the guitar. And what we like about that is they don't have preconceived notions. And a lot of times if people play the guitar just a little bit, if they try to play something but it's hard, then they think, oh, I can't write this. Well, it's hard for you, but somebody who's been playing for 40 years, it's not so bad. So we encourage them, write what you want. We're happy to look at anything at any time. And usually at the beginning, if we're working with a composer who doesn't have much guitar experience, we'll play for them. We'll give them recordings, we'll give them music of things that work, and we'll actually sit down with them and they can see and hear us play.
Wow.
Well, some people also, just as composers, are more interested in collaboration, and some are just not. One person we worked with who's really into collaboration is Augusta Reed Thomas. She was very clear when she accepted the commission that we were going to work together on this, and she was going to show us sketches of things she was doing, and then she wanted to hear it and then decide if she was going to edit it and how did it sound on the guitar, and which was smart, because a lot of times people who don't play the guitar are composing with a piano, and it's super resonant, and like things like hold out for a pretty long time. Even though like guitar and piano, yeah, they're similar in the way they produce sound, guitar is not nearly as resonant as a piano. So if you write for something to be held, a note to be held, say, to ring for a while, and the guitar is just gonna, it's not. So you got to tighten it up. You can't let things ring. It's kind of like a banjo like that. So like she heard that when we would play it, she'd hear, oh, that's not quite like I envisioned, and she would tighten it up. Another person who I think felt that way, who does play the guitar okay, is Paul Moravik. We got a piece from Paul Moravik, and he also found the guitars didn't really bloom quite like the keyboard had, and so he changed things around. And then we also got a piece from Lowell Lieberman, he didn't want us to necessarily work with him while he was writing it, but after he was done, then he was very open to suggestions about stuff that was unplayable. So if there was some kind of chord voicing that just really wasn't right, he was happy if we would suggest, well, look, this chord could be played with a different voicing, and it would sound much more natural. And that's what he wanted that.
Wow. Well,
so different people are very different.
Yeah, I was going to say, jumping a little bit in a different direction from composers, is you just recently, well, a couple of years ago, I think you celebrated 40 years of playing together. Is that right? Yes. That's amazing.
Yeah. Two long, or now 3 long years ago. So wow. This is now our 43rd year as a duo.
That's amazing. And for those who don't know, well, I know I'm talking to you, so I've read about what you've done and how the collaboration came about. But for those who don't know, why don't you tell us a little bit about how it even came together, and you're also in a relationship, so it's not just the personal, it's the professional as well.
See, you are the best straight man I've ever had, because the answer is, my standard joke is the success that we've had for 43 years is that we keep our professional fighting and our personal fighting completely separate.
So that's how we've managed to keep going. You mentioned earlier, though, like a lot of times orchestras, when they play new pieces, they don't get to play them a lot, but like a small ensemble like us, we do. And yes, we do. And then like, how do you get a new piece to be embraced by the public or appreciated? And I truly think it takes those lots of performances, because not all of them are good. I mean, I'm just going to say, I've heard new pieces new to me, or more modern pieces, where, like, especially like one experience I had that was striking was judging a competition where 2 people played the same thing, and one of them, I thought, oh, I don't like that piece that much. He played well, it seemed, but then another guy came out and played the same thing, and it was like, wow, that's a great piece, because he had a better idea for it. And so people need to play pieces to figure out like how to play them. And one person who told us that, I think specifically, Roberto Sierra, was saying like he doesn't write pieces that are easy to play necessarily from the start, but he said, people will learn. And it takes years. People study Brahms and Beethoven for years, and Bach feel like they know how to play it. So like, don't think that the first time you play it is the time you really know how to play it. You gotta play it and play it again and play it again, and then you'll start to know how to do it. So I think that's really true. And in our own experience, playing first in an ensemble for a long time, absolutely the new pieces we commission, they get a lot better over time. No question about it.
And it's wonderful to be able to keep coming back to repertory. Something like Lo Lieberman's piece that was written 20 years ago now. Oh my God. It was written in 2000, and we performed it quite a bit, and then we put it down for a while, and then we bring it back, and then other duos have started to perform it and record it, and we brought it back for our 40th anniversary so Lowell could come hear the concert in New York. And it does evolve. The music changes. That's what's exciting about being in an ensemble. We're just usually fortunate, that we're married to each other as well.
This is one of my favorite questions, and I ask this all the time. A life-changing moment for both of you, separately maybe, and both personally and professionally, maybe, if you like to answer that.
Wow, life-changing moment.
It seems our life just is always the same. Well,
it's a.
There are dumb ones, dumb life-changing. Okay, so my life-changing, actually, I got my knees replaced.
Wow.
Both of them. So it was pretty bad. Things were pretty bad before that. I couldn't walk around very much and couldn't stand and have conversation in a party. You'd have to sit down. There's just, then, gradually you stop doing things that you enjoy because it's just way, way too uncomfortable. You just can't. Yeah. So, like, things I did is, like, I used to like to cross-country ski, go out and hike around nature, work on my house. I don't know. There was like play tennis. There was like millions and millions of things that I just quit doing because I just couldn't. So now I have new knees, and now it's like I'm young again. So I can do all these things that I hadn't done for a long time. And then some that I was struggling with, I can really do it now. So that was pretty life-changing, I have to say.
Yeah. Michael, any that come to mind?
Well, yeah, I would say professionally, from a music point of view, but it also keeps working backwards more and more. When let me preface it by saying everything ends up being a life-changing moment. When you look back over it, life is just constantly about change. That seems to be the only constant. And every time something new happens, it brings us on a slightly different trajectory. That if it weren't quite that one, it would be different. Maybe better, maybe worse, just different. But when I was in high school, I guess I was a freshman in high school.
Wow, this is going way back.
See, my memory's not so bad yet. I had been studying with a teacher in New Jersey, wonderful musician and teacher, and he thought that after I had spent about 5 years with him, it was time for me to move on and look for a professional performer, someone who was really out there and teaching at the highest levels, training concert artists. And so I was 13 at the time. And it just so happened that a friend of mine from a local guitar society in Flemington, New Jersey, that we used to have our meetings in the back of a barber shop of Augie Loprinzi, who was also a luthier. And this one guy named Fred Dilzell from Madison, New Jersey, would go into New York every week for guitar lessons. He was about 10 years older than I was, so he was a grown-up. And I said, can I go in for a lesson with you sometime? And he said, no, actually, he invited me. He said, I'm going to a lesson next Monday, Columbus Day. Do you want to come? And I thought, well, I'm off from school. Sure, I went. And I went with Fred to the lesson on West 13th Street in Greenwich Village. And it was at the apartment of Alberto Valdez Blaine, Cuban guitarist. And I sat in on Fred's lesson. And I was like, wow, this guy's really serious. He's a little bit scary, but he's pretty serious. And I asked at the end, could I come for a lesson? He said, sure, come next Saturday and prepare the first 10 studies by Fernando Sor and the first 2 preludes of Villa-Lobos. And I was like, that was about 6 months worth of work. But I was 13 years old, so I said, okay. And that was my new trajectory after that.
That's awesome. Well, I want to go back a little bit, again, with guitar-specific questions and duos. I don't know too many. I have a friend in LA who's at USC doing graduate work, and he has a duo. But before you started your duo about over 40 years ago now, were there other really active and professional duos? And if so, who are they, and are they still around?
Yes, there were some. Well, I got a story to tell, but there was a couple of people from Greece. Duos tend to be either siblings or married couples. That has been kind of what happens. But this was a married couple, Evangelos and Lisa, and then there was another married couple, Ida Presti and Alexander Lagoya. Ida Presti, she was really good. And then there was
The Abreu brothers.
the Abreu brothers from Brazil. But then there was also a casual duo between John Williams and Julian Bream, and they recorded some things, and those recordings got around a lot. So yeah, there were some duos, but there actually is music. Like, people don't always think about that, but there's a history of repertoire that goes back to the Renaissance for 2 instruments. So it's not like like super exotic, but I think the best music is probably being written like now.
Yeah.
There was another duo, my teacher, Alberto Valdez Blaine, and his brother, Rolando Blaine, were the first classical guitar duo to perform at Carnegie Hall. In 1941, they gave their debut.
I'm sure there's others we're forgetting, but these are the ones I remember from like high school, like being interested. And I have to say, like, I had a teacher who also was Cuban. It was a woman in Florida, Luisa Sanchez de Fuentes, and she encouraged the idea of playing in a duo for women because it was more seemly. And then you would have somebody to like go around with you. It would be unseemly for a woman to be hustling a career on her own.
Wow, times have changed.
Yeah.
Although, what did Laura end up doing? Finding a husband to do the hustling for the career for her.
I would say, like, she had introduced me to a guy. He was actually quite a bit older than I was, but like when I was in high school, we played in a duo together because she thought that was, the way it should be. And it was fun. I liked it. But then I knew a lot of music, then a lot of repertoire for 2 instruments.
For us, being the duo started as an excuse to get together. We had first met when I played a concert at Florida State, where Laura was going to school. I went to Mannes School of Music, and I had come down for a concert and master class, and we met, and then we met again over the next year or so in Fort Lauderdale and back in Tallahassee. And then we were studying in Aspen together with Oscar Ghiglia, the great Italian maestro. And that's when we decided we would maybe spend a little bit more time together. And so that was 1977. So that was the official beginning of the duo. And I wanted her to come to New York, so I had to get her some gigs, and we got some places to play in Florida so I could come down there. And the rest is history.
That's awesome. I love this duo story because I've had a couple of guitarists on the podcast, but they're more, they're solo guitarists, I guess, or they're not in a duo. And so this is a really interesting story. I do want to know, with all the collaborations you've done with various artists and orchestras and chamber ensembles and commissioning all these composers, what's one collaboration, an artist, a composer that you would want to go back to and do another project with that person or that organization?
I'm going to let Laura think for a moment because she'll probably have something really important to say. But one of the things that I had the most enjoyable experience with was a concerto written by Daniel Binelli, the Argentine bandoneon virtuoso and composer. He was a protege of Piazzolla. So he's like Mr. Nuevo Tango of today. And Binelli had written he was working at the time on a solo guitar concerto. And he showed me the music, and I was like, Danielle, it's beautiful, can't be played. Turn it into a 2-guitar concerto. And he did. And it was called Concierto Buenos Aires. And we got to perform it with an opera orchestra in France, in the city of Reims. So we got to drink a lot of champagne. And we did it with the Virginia Symphony a few years ago. And being able to bring a piece like that to life with the full string orchestra was very exciting and inspiring. And I would love to have more opportunities to play that piece, to record it, and to work with Binelli again. Okay, what's yours?
Well, all these people that we've commissioned, I wouldn't mind having more pieces from some of them. I mean, we got some great pieces, and it's hard, to get the funding, and it takes years sometimes to get in line to get something. But I would ask some of these same people to write something. If the stars aligned, I would like to get other pieces by them. So there was more of a real repertoire. I think Lowell Lieberman has written now, 3 or 4 things, ensemble pieces with guitar in it. So he's getting to be an expert. And
Paul Moravik, very recently we were talking, and he said he would love to write something with voice for us, 2 guitars with voice. And of course there are a ton of other composers on our list too that we want to work with in the future.
Well, all this talk about music, I want to hear some things that you do outside of music, maybe some things that your fans and followers don't know about you that you do, but you're willing to share with us.
Yeah. Most people who are in the arts, well, I don't have to tell you this, but I'll tell others, that the arts are their life. Whatever other interests they may have, they're just doing their art constantly. And it's not a 9-to-5 job. It's not a 9-to-9 job. It's not a 8 to midnight job. It's you're just living it. Yeah. And I don't think we would have it any other way. Because it's a calling more than a job. We're totally committed to that. But there are some other things that we enjoy doing.
God, I was going to say, I don't know, I have a million things I do besides this. Well, one thing, I mentioned I play tennis, but I kind of regularly. But we also have this old house that we have restored. But I did a lot of, I've done everything, masonry, plumbing, cabinetry,
plastering,
carpentry, plastering. God, everything. I've done everything. Amazing. Yeah. So.
And I'm largely the supervisor, so I've learned all the skills as well.
Tiling. I sort of draw the line at really hard plumbing or
electricity
stuff, because you can burn the house down if you do it wrong. But I don't know if that's well, I mean, it actually turns out to be interesting. It's not exactly what I would have chosen to do, but here we had this house, and like, what are we going to do with it? Yeah. So now I'm fairly competent, and now I feel confident doing a lot of stuff. And then
the environment.
Yes,
preservation.
Well, I manage a 128-acre grassland bird sanctuary.
Wow.
That is, planted with native grasses. You didn't even know there was such a thing as native grasses.
And I bet you didn't know there were any birds left in New Jersey.
Well, actually, there's a lot.
But where we live is quite rural, and we were active helping a couple of organizations get farmland preservation and open space preservation in New Jersey, in western part of the state where we live. And this area Laura's talking about, which is only a mile from our house, is part of 4,000 preserved acres that will never be in houses. Well,
it's like farmland preservation, but this particular piece is actually just for birds. I mean, it ends up has to be managed, and a farmer helps manage it, but it's a bird farm.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I never, sometimes I ask these questions to get those kind of responses where I'm not expecting it, and this is fantastic. I'm so impressed.
Yeah. I'm going to say one thing cool about birds, if you're a musician, though, is they sing. And like, I didn't give it much thought until I had to do surveys of these birds to try to see if this was working. And I don't know jack about birds. But except now grassland birds, now I'm pretty good at that. But you hear them before you see them, because a lot of the ones that breed in this habitat we created, they're little. And the grass is like, Native American grass is like 8 feet tall.
Wow. Wow.
It's huge. It's huge. I mean, some of it's short, but a lot of it's really tall. So, like, if you get a pretty big prairie going, it's a great place for little birds to hide. So you can't always see them easily, but you can usually hear them. Their songs are quite distinctive. And that's true of all birds, that they're screaming at you every day. They're screaming and yelling to say, here I am, and you can't understand them. Like, if only you could understand what they were saying, you would know that they were all thousands of birds announcing themselves 24 hours a day. It's really interesting.
Going back, I have a couple more questions. I don't want to take too much of your time, but with guitar, I know some people use mics, some people use other extended techniques, and other, maybe computers and electronic sounds. Has that been part of what you do, and have you done any work with mics and electronic sounds and other collaborations?
Mostly we have not done anything than actually using our nails to pluck the strings, or
microphones we amplify, but that's not the same.
Or there's a composer named Arthur Campella from Rio de Janeiro who writes extremely intense and complex music. And the piece he wrote for us, the first few minutes is playing only on the backs of the guitars. And then we're also, in this drawer, we use spoons, we use...
he has a great sound effect of spoons.
Glasses, everything. He asks pencils that are part of the percussive techniques on the instrument. So we're always happy to do that when the composer asks for it. We haven't really done much with electronics, but as far as amplification, we're definitely big fans of people being able to hear what we do. I remember hearing John Williams at Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center many years ago, and he was amplified. It seats 2,500 people or whatever, and it was amplified so beautifully you could hear everything he did. And the New York Times critic wrote, "Oh, this was a travesty. He used amplification. You lost the purity of the sound." Well, the purity of the sound is, what? What? Oh, did he play something? So even in smaller venues, if something's like 200-300 seats, if it's not really good acoustically, I would much rather use very subtle sound reinforcement and allow people to really hear what we're doing dynamically, tonally.
On the extended techniques front, yes, we've done a lot with extended techniques, but not as much with devices.
Mm-hmm. Well, last question, and with such a great career, and one thing I love about what you've done is consistency, and that's what I tell people sometimes. Some of my younger students, I conduct some youth orchestras, is consistency is important, and it starts at a young age with consistent practice. Even if you do 15 minutes a day, that's very important than just doing 3 hours every month or something, you know. So and one thing about your group is that you've just kept it and you've done it for such a long time and really expanded the repertoire of Guitar Duo and went all over to promote the classical music and guitar. So it's such a fantastic group that you have, and I'm so happy that you joined me on the podcast. I want to know, with everything that you've done in your career, all the accomplishments, what advice would you give to young musicians? Because, you know, they're struggling. Some of them after college, they don't know what to do and how to make a career. It's tough. It's not that easy. What advice would you give them?
My advice is, you know, it's everybody grumbles, you know, from time to time about how they wish that things could be better or whatever. You know, it isn't an easy career, but nothing is an easy career. You know, as my grandmother would say, there's always a coop to clean. And like we've seen a few of these financial crises, which shockingly frequent financial crises that we've experienced in this country, where, you know, people who had the supposedly secure employment lost it because they're working for somebody who's making the decisions for them. And then, you know, if you're doing a job for someone else, is this really what you wanted to do with your life? Just work for someone else, producing what? So it's not an easy career, but if it's something that you know, if you're committed to it, I think people who are committed to it, they find a way. And yeah, it's not always very easy, but they just couldn't quite figure out what else to do that would be better than this. And I think that was a big factor for us, for me. Is this is the only thing I really know how to do that well. So, like, we didn't plan a fallback career, because a lot of parents would say, oh, well, you need to major in something practical because this isn't going to really do it for you. If you do that, that's what you're going to do, because it's going to be easier. You know, the future is going to be more clear, or at least it's going to seem easier. And it's going to seem easier until you get canned from that job because, you know, they're not making enough money in your industry and you're expendable. And it doesn't matter how hard you work for corporate America, you're always expendable. But if you are self-employed, you cannot be fired. You know, and that's nothing to sneeze at. You know?
You know, we're looking now at a time of great upheaval and what seems to be a lot of change. And it's scary change, like for all the teachers and for all the students. Not being in a classroom together is big change. I could go down the list. It's endless. But, you know, the only constant really seems to have been change. You know, performing in big concert halls. Well, that's only been the last couple hundred years. Before that, people only played for the king in his bedroom. You know, recording. Oh, now, where's the CD? Oh, my computer doesn't have a CD player anymore. It's all in the cloud. Okay, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there were no CDs.
There were LPs.
Yeah, but 100 years ago, there was no recording. It didn't exist. The only way you could make music was to either go to an orchestra playing in your town that piece and you'd never hear it again, or play it yourself. So change is constant. And for students, for young people, for old people like us, being willing to accept that there will be change, and if you are uncertain what that change is going to be, you figure out how to come up with the change. A friend of ours, a composer named Arnold Black, who wrote a piece for us with string quartet. He was also a violinist. He was a producer. He wrote jingles for TV. He produced concerts.
He also played, I think, Broadway stuff.
He wrote for Broadway.
He did everything.
He told us once, if you can't fit with the program, make your own program.
That's awesome.
It's pretty good advice.
Yeah.
I mean, we took that to heart.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope we do one of these in person. I love sitting across someone, and it feels kind of like that now, but I would love to sit across from you in the same room and have this conversation. Maybe one of these days.
One of these days, when people are allowed to get together again, we'll very much look forward to it.
Yeah, see, at least now we don't have to wear a mask.
Yeah. Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
All right, you
Take
too.
care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.